At my brother's wedding, I found my seat, a fold-up chair behind the DJ booth. His bride sneered, "You should be grateful we even let you come." My dad just laughed. "It's not like you're important." I picked up my gift, smiled, and said, "You're right. I'll take back what I brought." The music stopped before I even reached the exit. I, 32M, never thought I'd be the kind of person to walk out of my own brother's wedding. But then again, I never thought my family would treat me like an afterthought either. The invitation came 3 months before the wedding. It arrived in a plain envelope with my name scrawled on it, like an obligation someone had forgotten until the last minute. Inside was a basic card with the date, time, and venue. No +1 mentioned, no dietary preferences asked, no table assignment noted. My brother's fiancée had apparently spent months planning this wedding, obsessing over every detail from the shade of ivory on the napkins to the exact angle of the floral centerpieces. But somehow, nobody had bothered to plan for where I would sit. I should have seen the signs earlier. My brother and I had grown apart over the years, especially after he started dating her. She came from money, the kind of family where appearances mattered more than substance, where your worth was measured by your job title and the car you drove. I was a high school teacher, drove a 10-year-old sedan, and lived in a modest apartment. She made it clear from their first holiday dinner together that I wasn't the kind of family member she wanted to showcase. But he was my brother. We'd grown up sharing a room, playing video games until dawn, covering for each other when one of us missed curfew. So when the wedding invitation arrived, I ignored the nagging feeling in my gut and went shopping for a gift. I spent 2 weeks researching and saving up for a vintage record player I knew my brother had always wanted. It was a beautiful 1970s model, fully restored, with rich wooden finish and impeccable sound quality. It cost me nearly a month's salary, but I wanted to give him something meaningful, something that showed I still cared about the person he used to be. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at an upscale venue an hour outside the city. I put on my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for job interviews, and made sure I looked presentable. I arrived early, gift in hand, watching as luxury cars pulled up one after another, disgorging guests in designer outfits and expensive jewelry. Inside, the venue was transformed into something out of a magazine. White roses everywhere, crystal chandeliers, tables draped in silk with gold accents. A string quartet played softly in the corner while waiters circulated with champagne. I stood near the entrance, taking it all in, feeling increasingly out of place. My brother's fiancée appeared first, gliding across the floor in her pre-ceremony outfit, already looking like she'd stepped off a runway. She spotted me, and her face did something strange, a flicker of surprise followed by poorly concealed annoyance. She walked over and asked what I was doing here so early. I reminded her I was family and thought I should arrive on time. She looked me up and down with barely disguised contempt. She told me the ceremony wouldn't start for another hour and that I should wait outside until the other guests arrived. I asked about where I should put the gift and where I'd be sitting during the reception. That's when her expression shifted from annoyance to something colder. She said she'd have someone take care of it and walked away before I could respond. An hour later, the ceremony began. I found myself seated in the very back row, behind a column that partially blocked my view. My father sat in the front row, beaming with pride. My mother had passed away years ago, which left just the 3 of us as immediate family. Yet there I was, positioned like a distant acquaintance rather than the groom's only sibling. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. My brother looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I felt guilty for my resentment. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe this was just how these formal weddings worked. The reception started immediately after, and that's when things took their turn. Guests began filing into the reception hall, and I watched as everyone seemed to know exactly where to go. There was a seating chart displayed on an elegant easel near the entrance, with names written in calligraphy on small cards arranged by table number. I scanned the list, looking for my name. I found it at the very bottom, separate from all the table assignments. Next to my name was a single word that made my stomach drop: special. I approached one of the venue coordinators and asked about my seating assignment. She looked confused, checked her clipboard, and told me to wait while she found the wedding planner. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Other guests were already seated, appetizers were being served, and I was still standing near the entrance like a lost tourist. Finally, The wedding planner appeared, a harried woman in her 50s holding a tablet and speaking rapid fire into a headset. She asked my name, checked her list, and her face fell slightly. She told me to follow her. We walked past the main reception area where round tables were dressed to perfection, each with a centerpiece that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We walked past the dance floor where the DJ was setting up his equipment. We kept walking until we reached the very back of the room, behind the DJ booth, near the service entrance where catering staff were rushing in and out. There, tucked against the wall, was a fold-up chair. A single, metal fold-up chair, the kind you'd find at a community center picnic. It wasn't even at a table. It was just sitting there, alone, like an afterthought someone had added at the last second. The wedding planner looked embarrassed and said that apparently there had been some confusion with the seating arrangements. She apologized but explained that all the tables were full and this was the only spot available. The way she said it made it clear this wasn't confusion at all. This was intentional. I stood there, staring at that chair, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and humiliation. Around me, guests laughed and clinked glasses. The DJ tested his speakers, sending a bass thump through the floor. Waiters rushed past with trays of hors d'oeuvres, barely glancing at me. That's when she appeared again, my brother's new bride, now in her full wedding gown. She must have seen me standing there and decided to check on her handiwork. She walked up with this expression that was trying to be innocent but couldn't quite hide the satisfaction underneath. She commented that I'd found my spot and hoped I'd be comfortable. The way she emphasized comfortable made it clear she hoped for exactly the opposite. I asked if this was some kind of joke, if someone had made a mistake. She tilted her head with mock sympathy and said there had been no mistake. Then she added that I should be grateful they even let me come. The words hung in the air between us. Around us, the celebration continued, oblivious to this small moment of cruelty. I felt my face flush, anger and shame mixing into something hot and tight in my chest. Before I could respond, I heard a familiar laugh. My father appeared, walking over with a champagne flute in hand, his face already red from drinking. He'd always had a way of siding with whoever seemed more successful, more important. Lately, that meant siding with my brother and his new family. He asked what the holdup was and why I wasn't sitting down. His bride explained, with theatrical concern, that I was upset about the seating arrangements. My father looked at the fold-up chair, then at me, and actually laughed. He told me not to make a scene and said it wasn't like I was important anyway. He added that I should be happy to be included at all, considering how busy everyone was. Something in me snapped. Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly and completely. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly I saw everything clearly. The years of being overlooked, the constant comparisons to my more ambitious brother, the way my father had slowly written me off as the disappointment. This wasn't just about a chair. This was about how they saw me, how they'd always seen me. I looked at both of them and said they were absolutely right. I wasn't important. I didn't belong here. And since I clearly didn't matter, I'd take back what I brought. I walked past them, through the reception hall, back toward the entrance where gifts were displayed on a long table draped in white silk. There were boxes wrapped in expensive paper, envelopes thick with cash and checks, gift bags from high-end stores. And there, in the middle, was my vintage record player, wrapped in simple brown paper with a handwritten card attached. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered, the weight of it somehow satisfying in my hands. Several guests nearby noticed and watched with curiosity. I could hear my father calling after me, his voice taking on an edge of concern now, probably worried about how this would look. I kept walking. The DJ must have been paying attention because suddenly the music cut out. The whole room seemed to pause, conversations dying mid-sentence as people turned to see what was happening. My brother appeared from somewhere, still in his tuxedo, looking confused and asking what was going on. I stopped at the entrance and turned around. The entire wedding reception was staring at me now. 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, all witnesses to this moment. My father was pushing through the crowd, my brother's bride looking furious, my brother himself looking torn between confusion and dawning realization. I told them all, loud enough for everyone to hear, that I'd been given a special seat, a fold-up chair behind the DJ booth, because apparently I wasn't important enough for a real table. I said I'd been told to be grateful just for being allowed to attend my own brother's wedding. and I said that since that was how they felt, they didn't deserve my gift or my presence. My brother tried to speak, stammered something about not knowing, about there being some misunderstanding. I told him that maybe he should have noticed his only sibling wasn't included in any of the wedding planning, wasn't asked to be part of the ceremony, wasn't even given a proper seat. I told him I hoped his new life with his new family made him happy, because he clearly didn't need his old family anymore. I walked out. Behind me, I heard voices rising, my father shouting, the bride saying something shrill. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I felt lighter somehow, despite the heavy record player in my arms. I drove home, put the record player in my living room, and ordered pizza. I turned off my phone and spent the evening playing old albums, letting the music fill the silence. Update 1. The fallout started within hours, though I didn't know it at first since my phone was off. When I finally turned it back on the next morning, I had 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from my father, progressing from angry to threatening to oddly conciliatory. A few were from my brother, mostly asking me to call him. Several were from extended family members I barely spoke to, offering their opinions on my behavior. The one that caught my attention was from my aunt, my mother's sister, who I'd always been close to. She sent a simple message saying she was proud of me and that my mother would have been too. She added that she'd left the wedding shortly after I did because she couldn't stand watching them scramble to explain what happened. Apparently, my dramatic exit had created exactly the kind of scene the bride had spent months trying to prevent. According to my aunt, the music stayed off for nearly 10 minutes while they tried to figure out what to do. Guests were whispering, some were pulling out their phones to text friends about the drama, and my brother's new in-laws were absolutely mortified. The bride had apparently broken down crying, though whether from anger or embarrassment wasn't clear. My father had tried to spin it as me being unstable, jealous of my brother's success, unable to handle not being the center of attention. But too many people had seen that fold-up chair. Several guests, particularly some older family friends who'd known me since childhood, had started asking questions about why the groom's only brother was seated like an afterthought. The carefully constructed perfect wedding facade had cracked, and everyone had seen what was underneath. I didn't respond to most of the messages. What was there to say? But I did call my aunt back, and she filled me in on the rest of the evening. After I left, my brother had apparently argued with his new wife, demanding to know why I'd been treated that way. She'd insisted it wasn't her fault, that the venue had messed up the seating, that she'd tried to fix it, but there was no room. My aunt said nobody was buying it, especially since everyone knew she'd been obsessing over every detail for months. The reception had continued, but the energy was ruined. People kept bringing it up, kept asking what had happened. Some guests apparently left early. The expensive photographer and videographer captured everything, which meant there was now a permanent record of the groom's brother walking out carrying his gift while the entire reception watched in silence. My father called again that afternoon, and this time I answered. He launched immediately into a lecture about family loyalty, about embarrassing him in front of everyone, about ruining my brother's special day. I let him talk himself out, then asked him a simple question. Did he think I deserved to sit on a fold-up chair behind the DJ booth at my own brother's wedding? He went quiet for a moment, then said I was being dramatic, that it wasn't that big of a deal, that I should have just dealt with it and brought it up later. I told him that was the problem. He'd always expected me to just deal with it, to accept being treated as lesser, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I got. I told him I was done doing that. He started to argue, but I cut him off. I said I loved my brother, that I'd always love my brother, but I wasn't going to set myself on fire to keep them warm anymore. Then I hung up. Update 2. 2 weeks passed. I went back to teaching, back to my normal routine. My students had no idea anything had happened, which was refreshing. In my classroom, I mattered. What I taught mattered. My presence made a difference. Then my brother showed up at my apartment one evening. I almost didn't let him in. We stood at the door for a moment, just looking at each other. He looked tired, older somehow than he had at the wedding. He asked if we could talk, and against my better judgment, I let him inside. He sat on my couch, in the same spot where he'd crashed countless times growing up when we stayed up late playing games or watching movies. He looked around my small apartment, his eyes landing on the record player sitting in the corner. He mentioned that he'd always wanted one of those. I told him I knew. That's why I'd bought it for him. An uncomfortable silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. He said he didn't know about the seating arrangement, that he'd been so caught up in wedding planning that he'd left most of the details to his wife. He said when he saw the final seating chart, my name was listed at table 8, a perfectly normal table with other family members. I asked what happened between the chart he saw and the actual wedding. He admitted that his wife had changed it. She'd told him it was necessary to make room for some of her family's important business associates. He'd objected, but she'd convinced him it would be fine, that I'd understand, that family doesn't care about those things. I asked why he didn't check, why he didn't make sure his only brother had a proper seat at his wedding. He didn't have a good answer for that. He just sat there, looking miserable. He told me the past 2 weeks had been hell. His wife's family was furious about the scene, blaming him for not having better control over his family. His wife was barely speaking to him, saying I'd ruined the best day of her life. My father was pressuring him to cut me off completely, calling me toxic and unstable. But some of our relatives, the ones who actually cared, had been calling him non-stop, telling him he'd messed up, that he'd treated his own blood like garbage. He said he'd watched the wedding video, finally. He'd seen himself standing at the altar, saying vows about love and family and commitment, while his brother sat on a fold-up chair behind the DJ booth like an uninvited guest. He said it had made him sick to see it, to realize what he'd let happen. He apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology, wasn't enough to erase what happened, but it was genuine. He said he'd been so focused on building this new life, on impressing his in-laws, on becoming someone successful and important, that he'd forgotten who'd been there before any of that mattered. He said he'd forgotten me. I told him I'd noticed. I told him about all the times over the past few years when I'd felt him slipping away, when his fiancée would make little comments and he'd say nothing, when family gatherings became competitions I didn't know I was supposed to be participating in. I told him about the months of resentment that had built up, about feeling like I'd lost my brother to someone else's vision of who he should be. He cried. My successful, put-together, important brother sat on my couch and cried. He said he didn't know how to fix it, how to make it right. He said his marriage was already strained, that he was realizing maybe he'd made some mistakes, that the person he'd become wasn't someone he particularly liked. I didn't forgive him right away. I couldn't. But I told him I appreciated him coming, appreciated the honesty. I told him if he wanted to rebuild what we'd had, it would take time and effort. I told him he needed to decide who he wanted to be, who he wanted in his life, and what kind of relationships he wanted to have. I told him I wouldn't be anyone's afterthought anymore, not even his. He nodded, understanding. Before he left, he looked at the record player again and said it really was beautiful. I told him maybe someday he'd earn it. He smiled sadly and said he'd try. Update 3. 3 months later, things had shifted in ways I never expected. My brother had started therapy, working through his issues with people-pleasing and the way he'd lost himself trying to live up to others' expectations. He'd started setting boundaries with his wife, insisting on changes to how they approached family relationships. It wasn't easy, and I knew their marriage was struggling, but he was trying. We started meeting for lunch every couple of weeks, just the two of us. No wives, no father, no external pressures. We talked about real things, remembered who we used to be, slowly built something new. It wasn't the same as it had been, but it was authentic in a way our relationship hadn't been for years.